Everybody, you are listening to Incorruptible Mass. Our mission here is to kind of help you understand state politics. We talk a lot about why it's so broken, what we could have here in Massachusetts if we fixed it, and how you can get involved. And today we're doing a follow-up to last week's discussion of really our crisis in democracy. And last week, if you were listening, you heard us, at least by the end, say that we all pretty much agree that the number one problem that we have in democracy is that we just don't pass the policies that the people in America want, need, and deserve, right? We don't do that. And so why should they believe in democracy? Like, that's the core issue. And that it is a question of power. That the reality is that we do not have the power to make the government do what we want. And there's a subset of people who do, and those people get to make the government do what they want. So before we go on, that's what today's conversation is going to be about. It's going to be about how do we flip the balance of power. So before we go on, here are my two super awesome co-hosts. I will start with Jonathan Cohn.
Jonathan Cohn, he, him, his. I'm joining from Boston, and I've been active in kind of different issue and electoral campaigns here in Boston and statewide.
And Jordan Berg Powers.
My name is Jordan Berg Powers. I use he, him. I'm coming from Worcester, and I have also been active in electoral and campaign issues.
And I'm Anna Callahan, coming at you from Medford, she, her. So today we're gonna, just start off a little bit with how much this particular problem of power, what it is at the statehouse in Massachusetts, and how sort of prevalent it is that the people move from our side to the other side. And then we're going to talk about what we think is a pretty decent strategy for how we can flip that balance of power. So starting off with the Massachusetts Statehouse, I'll just bring up the recent last year's vote around the having the speaker, reinstating the speaker's term limits. And Jonathan, can you give us like the numbers on that? How many Democrats?
Yeah, let me pull it up quickly.
Yeah, I know it was out of all the Democrats, and this has been a thing that we've asked people who are newly getting elected to commit to not, to please reinstate the term limits. And out of all the Democrats in a super majority Democratic state house of 160 people, there were only 6 Democrats who voted to reinstate.
Yeah, the whole vote was 35 to 125. Yeah.
Mostly Republicans.
Which is mostly Republicans. Weirdly, like that you had like one Republican voting against that, which I'm even kind of fascinated by, because I don't know what that serves them. And it was a smaller number of Democrats voting off than had voted off 2 years prior. And it's what's so striking with that debate from last year on secret term limits is that when former Speaker Bob DeLeo had taken office, first, that one of his promises was that since he had been a part of some of the corruption in his predecessor, that he wasn't going to be just like that, and he promised term limits as a kind of a good government reform promise, as why people should trust him. And so it was a rather kind of amazing thing that once those ended after 6 years, everybody then just kind of, for a handful of exceptions, voted to repeal them, and we just haven't had them at all since. And the one thing I often say when it comes to, let's say, term limits in general, that term limits for, let's say, legislative office aren't really necessarily useful, I think, per se, for a heavily centralized executive power, and I think a Speaker of the House fills that role, that you need term limits because you don't want the situation where the existence of having that power means that nobody can meaningfully ever challenge it. And if that becomes the case, there's no actual real check.
So on that issue, people are unwilling, Democrats are unwilling to challenge the power, the base of power on that one issue.
Yeah, and just to that point, so this got, thanks to our partners at Act on Mass, they highlighted this study that was done by the Greenfield Recorder, which is that in 2021, 78% of Democrats, and this is quoting them, sorry, excuse me, 2021, 78% of Democrats voted with Speaker Mariano every single time. 78% of the Democrats, the House of Massachusetts House of Representatives voted with Speaker Mariano at 70% of the times, every single time. In fact, all but 4 Democrats voted with him at least 90% of the time. Thank you to Rep. Uterhoven, Rep. Connolly, Rep. Gouveia, and strangely colleague Gary as the people, those 4 reps who didn't. Remember, this is only recorded votes. Most of the floor votes are voice votes.
Meaning secret votes.
Right, in which, or more importantly, in which no one could, voice votes are often votes where they already have coalesced people to agree. So there's not even it means that they're not even debating. They're not talking about us, our issues, the things we care about, the things that affect us. They don't even bother to debate them, right? Like that's tragic in itself, in which House leadership just decides the outcome. If you're looking for some reps to thank, Rep. Uterhoven, Connolly, Nika Alugarda, and Tammy Gouveia.
Yeah, and 2 of
Also,
those, by the way, are now leaving the House. 2 of those 4 are leaving the House.
I will say Nika is just above, I think in this study, she's just above 90%, but she's right there. And the other one is definitely Colleen Gary, because I looked at the Greenfield Recorder as a thing, and the person who votes the least is Rep. Uterhoven, and then it's Colleen Gary.
Yeah. So all of this is really to talk about where power exists, who controls what bills can pass at the State House, right? Mm-hmm. And no question, it is in the seat of the Speaker of the House, and it has not mattered who sits in that seat. So it's not about replacing that person, because it doesn't matter whether it's DeLeo or Finneran or Mariano, whoever that is, they control what bills can make it to the floor, what bills can pass. And so what we are hoping to do is to make another seat of power, right? A competing center of power. This is where I come in, and I talk a little bit about how I'm a dog with a bone or a broken record or whatever you want to call me. But for the last 5 years, I've been training people mostly at the local level to use a very particular strategy that just elects a bunch of people quickly through running slates. Gets a lot of quickly gets to a majority of the electorate by having a large coalition. And then, has a really different relationship with elected officials after the fact, that I think is the more sort of unique piece of this. So I'm just going to go into a little bit of detail about what happens after the election, and part of this is it's just an insight into what's the problem? In this process, we elect progressives, and then we hope that progressive policies will pass, and something's broken, something's happening between step D and step E, something is going wrong and we're not getting to that next place. And so in the strategy that I train people in, that piece of the puzzle is that after they're elected, there's basically kind of a one-way street that elected officials move toward the demands of a powerful few, and they move away from what most people in America or in Massachusetts actually want. So it's just a one-way street. They don't come back unless you create a center of power, right? They're just going toward power. And that's, it doesn't mean that everyone moves just as quickly. Some move quickly, some move slowly. Some may move only a little bit down that road, but they just don't come back the other way. And I think we see that happening to state reps, sadly, a lot, that they move toward the speaker and toward this concept that, like, oh, the only way to get things done in the state house is to, do what the speaker asks you to do and what leadership asks you to do, because that's the center of power, the only place of power. So we want to do things that create a relationship with our elected officials afterwards, where we're offering stuff. And this is where I think what the Richmond Progressive Alliance says, and this is kind of where I learned this model from, is they talk about how, if given the realities of being an elected official, that if we don't support them after they're elected, that we have to expect them to move to the other side. And, tons of details about why, right? I mean, there's basically tons of carrots and sticks. The speaker, I'm sure we could talk endlessly about how many things the speaker can offer them and can take away from them. I don't know if you guys have any favorites of things that you think only the speaker can give them.
I mean, I think that there's lots, right? Like there's the offices, there's the staff, there's parking spaces, but there's more money, right? Because they make too little. And so if you want your state reps to do your job, that's a whole other problem. But I think the biggest thing that we hear as the reason that they move away is it's access to the system, to the crumbs, right? It's one of the things that changed my life was being in South Africa. And one of the things that I think it was hard to understand is how people who had the clear majority could be under rule of people who were the clear minority. And one of the things that the English taught in colonialism is systems of like opportunities to power, so as to divide people who otherwise would have power. And so one of the things the State House does is it is run exactly like the apartheid South African state, without the violence and the clear racial animus, right? But the structure that the colonial governments put in place, right? So the British system of divide and conquer is the same, which is that you give people something to lose if they possibly try to band together to demand real power and real change. And so the things that they would lose are like access to the small bills, the small incremental change that they want to pass, the money for the park, so the thing that a state rep will say is, oh, well, I need to go along with the speaker because I lose the ability to pass this one thing, or my one bill will never have a say. And some of those bills are really important, but often those bills, again, which is why I think we talk about this all the time, are at the margins of, like, they affect real people and they will make real positive change on people's lives, but they are not the systematic changes to the system. And so that is why I liken it to telling me that it's a good tune, that you're playing a good song as the Titanic goes down. Because yeah, it's important, right? If I'm about to die, I might want to listen to something good, but better would be to like not run into an iceberg, right? Like better would be to fix these major issues. And so I think that's the thing that most of them run into, is they are willing to trade real change for small bites at the apple. And what leadership does is it does a good job of giving you a false sense that there's more ahead. Hey, just play with us. We promise you that we're going to do something, even though that will literally never happen.
But it's also not just that they offer them these things, is that there is a pervasive understanding at the State House that there is no other option. There is no credible plan to win on the left. There is no, that doesn't exist. So it's not that they're choosing between one thing of getting these small crumbs and these small incremental changes and another potential big win. They are convinced, and I've talked to a lot of like deeply progressive people on the left, even who are campaign advisors, who they say, well, you're stupid if you don't do what the speaker says, because it's the only way to get things done, right? We hear this in presidential campaigns, we hear it in, state rep campaigns, like that's how you get things done. And that if you don't play along, that you will not get anything done. And they have, because that's the only center of power, they have in fact created that reality. That is a reality currently, because we on the left don't have a credible plan to win on policy. So that's part of what we have to create.
The thing as well that I think that kind of really captures is there's a very that there's a realm of, let's say, short-term wins one can achieve in that strategy, but it becomes this, but there's this dynamic which the ability to achieve modest gains is also typically dependent on there being a left flank to you on many things. It's like the historical thing with in politics, where it's like the kind of the more moderate liberals' ability to achieve their own professed goals is only possible under the condition that there being a left that wants something greater.
Yeah.
And it's something, and you have kind of a fascinating dynamic where it's like, let's say that we like buy your belief that you need to work in that system. It doesn't work if everybody does it. It's the whole ability of that type of system to work depends on there being people, like being something that exists on the other side of it that ideally would eventually just actually have attained actual power within that structure and not having to rely on that system. But you're not getting the things that you say that you want with a system where almost everybody is operating under those shared assumptions.
Right, and this is like a unique problem with one party states. Like we have one party state, supermajority in both houses, and that really does lead to this complete lack of any other centers of power. Like there's no Republican center of power, there's no left center of power, there's nothing but the speaker. It's a complete vacuum of power except for the speaker.
And I just want to say that, like, to your point, Anna, I literally have had state reps say to me, "Tell me what the other plan is, Jordan, and I'll do it." Like, tell me what to, like, they'll just straight up say that. I'm not against what you're saying. Like, yeah, I'd love to take on the speaker, but tell me what the plan is. And it's hard to give an alternative to that. And for those people who, I'm not a person who believes that because something has been done in music, you can never, right? Like, I think we have not been successful, so try things, right? Like, I'm a big believer in that. But I will say that having been at this for over a decade, we have tried a lot of things. It's not that this is a problem that's unknown to us or the reps themselves. There have been many iterations to try to fix this problem. And I have seen the speaker, Speaker DeLeo was an unindicted co-conspirator for giving out free jobs at the probation department to try to keep power when he almost lost power. People forget that. He promised progressive things to keep that power and then basically did the bare minimum of that promise. I have seen him run when people tried to approach him directly, successfully run Democrats out of power, right? Like, so successfully replace them with Republicans through, partnering with, later in his term, partnering with Baker to ensure to use big money to silence opposition, right? And
you mean by literally getting the Democrat unelected, by getting a Republican to win a seat where a Democrat was sitting, because that Democrat was too progressive and they were problematic because they were creating a different power center. Yeah, they were rocking the boat.
Right. They were rocking the boat. Yeah. And so that has a real, all of those effects being very effective at sort of, being, and to your point about not having a sense of power, the Republican and the Democrat working together to create a uniparty that is sort of outside of the norms of the party sort of belief systems, but just sits above it with its own belief systems that are pretty dumb, but dominate. That sort of, that creates this weird, it just created this creates this thing that chills any attempts to try to push things or do real things to make change. And that's, I think that's part of the underlying thing. But I did want to say that, like, it's not that people haven't tried, it's that, people have tried certain things and those things have not worked. And so I think what I see, thankfully, people looking for is a system that better centers, rather than constantly trying to fix the building. People are moving towards, how do we fix ourselves? How do we create systems where we center the power and then they're responsive to us? Because going up there and trying to fix that is going to fail as best as I could tell. And I have, like I said, if you have ideas, let's have at it. But we have tried for as long as I've been around and longer to try to fix the building, so to speak. And so I think we need to start fixing ourselves and thinking about how we hold power and how we interact with the people we send there.
Yeah, and interacting with the people that we send there is like this crucial part of this model that I'm super excited about, and have seen work. And like, just to touch on some of these things, one is just having people so there's a coalition, right? You have a nice big coalition of progressive and marginalized communities that can come together and discuss. But you're not always going to agree on things, but at least coming together to kind of form some strategies, as well as some carrots. And some of the carrots that we offer to elected officials include things like helping lift that burden of constituent services. So that's the technical term that means, like, basically, if you're a state rep or a city councilor or anybody, part of your job is any constituent that reaches out to you for help, you need to provide them with help. And that often is, with the bureaucracy of government, helping them through like the unemployment process when it was all backed up, like helping make sure that they can get those benefits, helping people where like a tree fell down in a park and it has to be, taken care of, or, pothole, whatever it might be. I mean, potholes are more city council, and so are trees, but at the state level, there are crosswalks. We contacted somebody because it's a state road, and the crosswalk literally has people turning left off of a very fast street at the same time as pedestrians are trying to, it's like a walk for the pedestrians, and the cars are literally like given the green arrow to run into the pedestrian. So those sorts of questions come up from, could be 1 or 2 a week. It could be 100, right? If when COVID happened and people were suddenly unemployed, like there were hundreds of people contacting their state reps trying to get their help with unemployment. And so providing people in their district who can be trained to like do some of that mutual aid and help lift that burden. That's like a real need of state reps in a state house where, according to this Progressive Dems of Massachusetts report, like staffing is just a huge problem, and none of them are provided with enough staff. And then also providing like legal help. I tell you, a lot of state reps, they're given, Denise Provost talked about this. She said it's like being at a university because, every day or every week you're given a totally new topic that you have to become an expert on. And the vote is in a week, or the vote is in, the test is in 5 hours, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's like a week is generous by Massachusetts House standards.
Indeed. And so having people around who are available are, lawyers, who are experts in policy, or just other people experts in policy through the coalition who can provide that kind of help. Another thing I think about is how there was, some urgency or some, really some movement around TOPA, which is the Tenants Opportunity to Purchase Act, which is the ability, like when a large building is sold, it allows the people living in that building to make the first offer of buying that building, and maybe not all being forced to move out, not all being evicted. So it's really great legislation. And when there was a lot of movement to get that to happen, there were 6 different bills written by 6 different legislators that all came up at the same time. And then suddenly everybody had to run around and like read all of these different bills. And imagine if there was a coalition that came together and talked beforehand about like, hey, like what should be in this bill and who's going to write it, and, kind of reducing the level of how many people have to read how many hours of legalese, and how many people are going to spend all their time writing all this stuff. So providing support, not just in their elections, providing support in the actual work of governance. It's part of the model that I feel like I haven't really seen done so much by other folks, and that we're hoping is going to lend itself to some change at the State House.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about sort of how you envision that model might be sort of brought into Massachusetts? Because I agree. I think, when I think about sort of the future of this work and where I think it's headed, as I said, I think the way in which we think about our relationship to the state house, to the reps is important. And we've spent time talking about how like lobbying is silly. Like a lot of the like way that we lobby is silly, and the way in which we interact with each other. One of my favorite episodes is when we sort of talked openly about this secret that goes around, which is that the amendment process where we all scramble around to get them to amend the budget is a silly process that we know means literally nothing. It doesn't make any sense, and it's just for show. And so, we talk a lot about like how the way in which our community interacts. And when I say our community, I mean regular people vis-a-vis the organizations that we invest time in, the organizations that represent us that we might not be members of, but like care about, like trying to make our lives better. The way in which we as a community are interacting with those in power is really broken. And also the thing that Jonathan always says, which is that the state house is a weird place because they have two bosses, but only one of them is actively being in charge, right? Like only one of them is the speaker, who is definitely paying attention to what they're doing, and the other is a populace who is at best trying to keep up, but there's no way to know because there's no information, because our media has failed to educate people on what individual reps are doing, to the fact that the reps themselves make it totally impossible for us to know what they're doing. So, I think that like, so anyway, so I'm thinking about we've described some of these problems. How does this model sort of intersect and fix some of those things?
I mean, tell me if I'm, not describing the way, because I love the question. I want to make sure I'm kind of getting at the answer to that question. Through Incorruptible Mass, the way that it works is like the coalition comes together, and any efforts at before we have elected officials who are like tied to or on the slate, who are tied to the organization, the broad organization, during like electoral season and everything, lobbying efforts are tied to an electoral strategy. Other efforts, like protests or raising awareness, other efforts are tied to an electoral strategy, so that those elements are pieces of building a center of power rather than being separate from building a center of power. They're like a part of that effort. And then, the concept is that a slate of candidates who have an agreement that they have signed with Incorruptible Mass, the coalition of organizations coming together, that they are going to look to us to provide them with carrots rather than looking to the speaker to provide them with carrots. So that's like the sort of some of the essential ways that I would describe the relationship and how we're going to create a center of power. I'm not sure that exactly answered your question though.
I think what I'm thinking is like, also, yes, it does answer my question, but like specifically, like what is it? So when I think about the Richmond model, the thing that speaks to me is the way in which the community thought of itself about those things. So what I mean by that is like specifically, it did things like it tried to think about who was it recruiting? Who is it trying to get to run for office? And it was trying to get away from the sort of like, lawyers and people who sort of didn't, intellectualized the things that people in Richmond were going through, and rather people who had lived experiences with the problem, so that it's harder it's harder to tell somebody that like, oh, what you're thinking is that's fine in theory, but it's not actual reality, when like you've lived those things. Tell somebody who lives in public housing that public housing is fine, you don't need more money. Tell somebody who's renting that actually like the system with landlords is fine and you don't need to worry about rent, right? Like people with those lived experiences being centered. And then also the way in which the other thing is like, there's lots of books and theories about how to like bring regular people in and all these into the power. But the thing I like that the Richmond did is it wasn't wasting its time with the sort of intellectual side. It was like, we're going to bring people in. We're not only going to we're not only going to sort of bring people from movements who have lived these experiences and try to run them for office, but we're going to be clear that we're in this together. We're in coalition together, and here are all these regular people, and then offering regular people opportunities to join in a clear political strategy. So it wasn't sort of esoteric. It wasn't like hard to understand. It was like this bad Exxon is doing bad thing. Chevron is doing bad things in our community. We can stop it if we work together, and you can join us. If you just simply join us, we will have more power. And look, I'm running, so that we have like, there's a hope, there's a clear strategy of like, you believe in us, but we're going to do something, right? Because I think the other piece is, one of the things I think about living in, I live in I live adjacent to one of the poorest zip codes in the state. My community, where I live is, there's a lot of drugs, and apparently there was an arrest for prostitution, for a house that had people who were being like, around the corner from me, people were apparently women were being enslaved, like crazy to think about, around the corner from me. And so like, I live in a poor part of Worcester, in a city, right? And a lot of people can't vote in my community, but a lot of people who could vote don't vote because they're just like, why bother? And there's a I always like to say, the clear, if you ever want to know why government doesn't work, talk to a poor person who has to interact with government, right? It is broken for people who need to access it. And what I liked about what Richmond did is it gave people a clear thing it was going to do, and then it did it. Right? Like, it brought people together, it ran people for office, it wasn't successful right away, but it built on itself, it continued that work, and then it did the thing it said it was going to do.
Yeah, and so I'm so glad you brought this up. This is one of my absolute favorite things about this model, is how much, like, we elect people thinking that their job is to vote, to write legislation and vote for things. That's not the job as is described in this model. The job of the elected official, because we provide legal help, we provide policy experts. You don't have to be a policy expert. That's not the point. The point of being an elected official is to bring underserved people into the political process. That is the job. So your work as an elected official is to make sure that you don't just have office hours and let people self-select that they're going to come to you. You choose who you're going to listen to, by who is it that is truly affected by policy. You go to where those people already are. You have the leadership of those organizations and those communities in your like kitchen cabinet, or your, whatever, like sometimes they would call it like a packet party, where they would go over the entire city council packet. Like, those are your close advisors, are the people with that lived experience. And what it does is it centers them in the political process. We often talk about like lifting marginalized voices. And like, we could be yelling as loud as we can, and we can't get policies passed. Like, that's not enough. Like, lifting voices is not enough. And what this does is it actually puts them in the seats of power, number one, as candidates and elected officials, and number two, as the trusted week by week regular advisors to the elected official in their district. And because those elected officials, their main job is to, elevate people's awareness of and interaction with politics, we raise everybody up, right? So non-voters become voters, voters become activists, activists become, the actual people, guiding the policy of the legislator. And that brings people to this understanding that like, hey, politics is a thing that, number one, can do good in the world. Number two, that's like a real path for me. A person who's not a lawyer, a person who's not like, didn't go to college or whatever it might be. That's like my favorite part of this entire thing, is how it just completely changes what the entire role of an elected official is. And I know I want to do a last call here. I could talk about this forever. But I know we're running a little late too.
I'll say that one of the things I think, one of the things that I like, one of the things that I think is important to note is that we need to, we need to fix ourselves. Like our community needs to fix itself vis-a-vis how it thinks about power, how it thinks about it interacts with the system. We spend a lot of time trying to get the statehouse to be nice to us. And one of the things that I think all of us are passionate about is organizing in a way that centers the people like taking back power from their representatives. So, anytime, so if you ask me like, Jordan, what are you excited about? I am always excited when groups are contacting either their base or contacting people who live in those in the districts that the representatives live in, and specifically do the things that anger them. Things that will get you an angry phone call, things that will get them to be like, oh, I'm never going to talk to you again. We're never going to pass your thing, whatever dumb thing that they say in response. We had, it was so alarming for our representatives when Act on Mass started organizing that literally some of them were just like yelling at them because they don't know what it's like to have a functioning democratic system where regular people tell them what they think. And if they don't do it, they're mad. That's called democracy.
They were calling them terrorists.
Yeah, and they were
Literally
freaking out about basic democracy. So that's how broken this relationship is, that basic democratic oversight. That is boring when we think about that. Like no congressperson would be like, I can't believe somebody organized phone calls to me. No congressperson would think that. Most regular states don't think it's weird when regular people tell them, I don't like what you did on that vote. But in Massachusetts, that's enough for you to literally lose your mind and call people terrorists.
This will be part, since we'll be wrapping up, it's always a helpful thing to realize that most state reps really don't hear from that many people that often. And so that's something that historically leads to the few angry conservatives in their district having outsized power, because they know that it just takes a certain number of calls, and then suddenly the legislator who represents a district that voted for Joe Biden by 40 points is like, my district is purple, I don't know if I can take this vote, because that's all I'm hearing. Whereas and actually realize that as a constituent, that if they're not hearing from a lot of people, you need to make sure that they hear from you, and also make sure they're hearing from the voices that they should be hearing from.
Totally. Wow. Thanks so much, guys. Boy, I'll tell the people listening that, man, I was sad I didn't start recording 40 minutes earlier. We just had a three-way it was super fun. Next time, maybe we'll just press record right when we start. But always an incredible pleasure. I'm so honored to be here every week with you guys. And hey, thanks everybody for listening. We will see you in a week.